And we're going to personal finance. Have you built up your credit card debt over the summer?
If you did, Larry Sprung is here to help you create a plan to pay that down. Larry, I bet you got some good tips for us.
I do.
Yes, that's for sure. He's a certified financial planner and author of Financial Planning Made Personal. He's also a founder of Midland Financial. So Larry, what advice can you give to our viewers who may have built up a modest amount of debt from recent expenses and they want to pay it off quickly, but with ease?
Yeah, having fun costs money, and we know from the last couple of years it's been costing more to have that same amount of fun. So it's something that you have to take a look at. You want to take a look at what debts you have and start planning on attacking those debts so you can be ready for the holiday season.
Yeah, and I mean, paying down this debt can really, like we just talked about, it can cost a fortune. TransUnion, for instance, says the average interest rate sits at over 20% right now. So are there tips to cut down on interest rate payments, for example?
Yeah, so interest rates for credit cards are at all-time highs right now. There's no doubt about it. And there are a couple of things you should think about. Number one is call the credit card company and let them know that you're looking for a lower interest rate. Sometimes there are opportunities to lower it just there. In order to start cutting the payments, there are a couple of different strategies you can take to start paying down that debt. And one will lower the interest costs and one won't, but one will give you a path to creating good habits. So you could either look at what we call the snowball effect and start looking at smaller debts that you have on smaller cards and start eliminating those right away. Get rid of them and use that momentum of getting rid of those debts to start moving on to the next card. Now, that may cost you a little bit more in terms of interest, but it'll get that habit going of paying and getting rid of that debt. The other method, which will save you interest, is look at those cards that you have the biggest balances on, that have the highest rates of interest. Start attacking those, not just with the minimum payments, but more than the minimums. And that'll start eating away at those interest payments as well.
Yeah, the Wall Street Journal calls that the avalanche method.
Correct.
You just go after the highest interest rates. It kind of makes sense, right? I mean, which one would you recommend, snowball or avalanche?
It depends on what's going to give you the best path to feeling good about what you're doing. Some people just having that small win on the snowball effect, although it's costing you more in interest, just having that knowledge that you've eliminated one credit card bill and on to the next gives people the confidence to move on and continue down that path. So you just find what works for you and continue doing it.
Right. So what about consolidating that? So basically rolling different payments into one loan. Is that a good strategy? And if so, maybe it also depends on who. Do you have any tips who this might be good for? Yeah,
so typically it really pertains to people who have higher credit scores because they're the only ones that really will qualify for that type of opportunity where you can transfer the balances to perhaps a 0% credit card where they'll give you 0% interest for 6 to maybe 24 months at most. So if you have that high credit score, you can certainly use that as an ability to transfer those balances to get some relief from interest payments. But just remember, it's going to be there if you're not making those payments. So make sure you're cracking away at that debt over that period of time so that at the end of the 6 or 24 months, it's a zero balance and you've gotten rid of it. Also be aware that when that period runs out, whether it's 6 months or 24 months, the interest rate is going to go up to really the highest rate that is really available at that time. So you really want to make that effort to get rid of that debt during that period.
Really great ideas, Larry. And what about getting a personal loan to refinance debt you have on a credit card? Is that worth it?
It's something to consider. You really have to look at what rate of interest you're going to be eligible for on that personal loan. If it's similar to or greater than what you're getting on the credit card, it may not make that much sense. But if it's if it gives you a significant reduction in that interest cost, it's certainly something to consider.
Got it. So what about just some general tips, maybe on budgeting, just so those debt pitfalls maybe can be avoided next summer?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing is to create a plan so you don't end up in this situation where you start the summer and then you end the summer with the debt. You don't want to have those summer doldrums and have the added debt on top of it. So you really have to take a look at what amount of money you have coming in, where your expenses are going, see if there are things you can completely eliminate, get rid of, reduce it, and then look at the extra income that you have over your expenses every month and start allocating that and plan accordingly. If you know that you spend X every summer, work those months outside of summers to start accumulating a savings account to help fund your summer fun.
So, Larry, we have $1.14 trillion the Americans do in credit card balances right now, according to the Federal Reserve and Bank of New York. How do we get here?
Yeah, I mean, listen, credit cards are something that are always utilized. You know, my family, we use them very heavily. We pay them off every month, which I think is the best way of doing it. But I think also if you look at that number just under a microscope, it looks like a really terrible number, and it is. But at the same time, if you look at where personal incomes are compared to where they were, if you look at consumer spending in terms of personal income, it's still not as egregious as you might think.
Some good news.
But it does sound like the interest rates on that are especially high. Does it make sense to maybe opt to not necessarily take that credit card debt, but maybe I've heard people maybe take out loans or small loans for vacation?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where your situation is, what avenues you have to borrowing, right? The problem is that because interest rates have been so high for the last couple of years, the interest rates on credit cards are at all-time highs. The hope is if we see some relief from the Fed in the coming months and we see some rate reductions, that will impact it. But just keep in mind, right, it's not going to go from 21 to 5%. It's going to go from 21 to maybe 15. So it's still a very steep number. So you have to figure out what's best for you and your family and how you should spend. And if you need to borrow, what's the best route of borrowing.
Such great tips from you. Larry Sprung, certified financial planner and author of Financial Planning Made Personal. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.